Yes.
They were already laid out like this when I entered.
Rawlyn Michelle Strizich operated without real oversight for years as an evidence technician inside the Billings Police Department. Dozens of criminal cases depended on her. Not one person checked.
And you didn't touch them?
No. I just logged them.
Dozens of active criminal cases. One evidence room. One technician with the keys. By the time the internal review was complete, every drug prosecution that had passed through Billings Police Department evidence storage during her tenure was in question. The investigation did not start with a tip from a colleague. It did not start with a hidden camera. It did not start with an anonymous letter. It started with a question inside the department about the physical state of the bags on the shelves. And in a room built on the assumption that every bag is exactly what the label says it is, a single question like that is enough to collapse the floor beneath dozens of prosecutions at once. Before we go any further, would you trust the person who controls your evidence locker with the integrity of your own criminal case? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. We hold authority figures accountable every single week, and stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Rawlyn Michelle Strizich was born in Billings, Montana, in the late winter of 1990. Her father worked as a diesel mechanic at a fleet shop off King Avenue East. Long hours, grease under his fingernails, a paycheck that came in steady, but never with any margin. Her mother was a cashier at the Albertsons on Grand Avenue, the same store she had worked at since 1986. The family lived in a small ranch-style house on the south side of Billings, near the rail yards. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A wood-paneled living room with a television set that stayed on most evenings until her father fell asleep in his recliner, with the remote still in his hand. Rawlyn was the older of 2 daughters. Her sister, JC, was born 3 years later. The girls shared a bedroom until Rawlyn was 16. Family photographs from that era show 2 blonde children in matching Easter dresses on a brown couch. 2 children in pink ski jackets standing in the snow at Red Lodge. 2 children fishing on the Yellowstone River with their father in a flat-bottomed aluminum boat. The childhood was modest, but not unhappy. There were birthdays, there were holidays. There were summers spent at her grandmother's house in Roundup, where the road turned to gravel half a mile before the driveway. She graduated from Billings Senior High School in 2008. Her grades were unremarkable. Her teachers described her, in the kind of throwaway evaluations that follow ordinary students through 4 years of high school, as quiet, responsible, and occasionally distracted, but reliable when given a clear task. She did not play sports. She did not run for student council. She worked the closing shift at a town pump gas station on 27th Street for most of her senior year, ringing up cigarettes and gallon jugs of windshield washer fluid for the same regulars night after night. College was discussed and quietly abandoned. Her parents did not have the money. She did not have the grades for a scholarship. She enrolled briefly at Montana State University Billings in the fall of 2008, took an introductory criminal justice course and an English composition course, withdrew before the spring semester, and returned home. She told her sister later that she had felt out of place in the lecture halls. She liked the criminal justice readings. She did not like sitting in a room of 200 people listening to a professor she could not get close enough to ask a question. For the next 6 years, Rawlyn worked a series of small jobs in Billings. She was a receptionist at a chiropractor's office on Broadwater Avenue. She was a part-time clerk at a property management company that handled rentals near the Montana State University Billings campus. She was a barista at a coffee shop in the Heights for 14 months. None of the jobs paid well. None of them lasted more than 2 years. By the winter of 2014, she was 24 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment off Central Avenue, and quietly running out of patience with the trajectory her life had taken since high school. In December of that year, the Billings Police Department posted an opening for a civilian evidence technician. The position required a high school diploma, the ability to lift 50 pounds, a clean background check, and what the posting described as demonstrated attention to detail and procedural compliance. It paid $16 an hour to start. It came with health insurance. It came with a pension. It came with a city ID badge and a uniform shirt with the Billings Police Department patch sewn onto the sleeve. Rawlyn applied on January 12, 2015. She was interviewed twice. She passed the background check without difficulty. She started on April 6, 2015, a Monday morning, 25 years old, in a pressed navy blue uniform shirt and dark slacks, signing the paperwork that would give her keyed access to one of the most procedurally sensitive rooms in the Billings Police Department. Her first months on the job earned her exactly the kind of evaluations a department wants to see from a new civilian hire. Detail-oriented, reliable, strong attention to procedural compliance. Demonstrates initiative in managing complex inventory backlogs. Her training officer, a 22-year veteran of the evidence unit named Donna Halverson, signed off on Rawlyn's probationary period 2 months early. The note in her personnel file read, "Strizich has shown a faster grasp of chain of custody procedures than any civilian hire in recent memory. Recommend full clearance for independent intake and storage duties." By 2017, Rawlyn was handling intake and storage independently. She was one of 3 civilian evidence technicians on the unit's roster. She was being trusted with long-term storage rotations, the bags of evidence from cases that had moved past the active investigation phase into the slow procedural march toward trial. That same year, she married a man named Tyler Strizich, a journeyman electrician she had met at her sister's wedding. They bought a small 2-bedroom house on the south side of Billings, 3 blocks from the house she had grown up in. They adopted a black and white cat from the Yellowstone Valley Animal Shelter and named it Domino. For 4 years, by every external measure, Rawlyn Michelle Strizich was exactly the kind of quiet, competent, mid-career civilian employee a police department is built on. She showed up on time. She left at the end of her shift. She did not gossip. She did not complain. She submitted clean paperwork. She passed every audit she was asked to assist with. Her colleagues, when later interviewed by Internal Affairs, used the same word over and over to describe her. Ordinary. There was nothing about Rawlyn Strizich that suggested what was coming. That changed in the spring of 2019. To understand what Rawlyn Strizich did, you have to understand the room she did it in. An evidence room, sometimes called an evidence locker, sometimes property and evidence, sometimes simply the cage, is one of the most procedurally controlled spaces in any American police department. It is where every physical item recovered during a criminal investigation is logged, sealed, stored, and held until trial. Drugs, firearms, cash, knives, cell phones, clothing, stolen property, biological samples. Anything a patrol officer or detective takes into custody during the course of an investigation, anything that might one day be presented to a jury, sits inside that room from the moment of seizure until the moment a prosecutor signs it out for court. The Billings Police Department's evidence storage facility occupies a secure section of the headquarters building on North 27th Street. The intake counter is at the front, separated from the main hallway by a steel security door and a service window. Behind the counter is the climate-controlled storage area itself. Long rows of industrial metal shelving labeled by case number and date of intake, refrigerated lockers for biological evidence, a separate vault for cash and firearms, and a long-term storage section for cases that have moved past active investigation into the holding pattern before trial. The rules around the room are absolute on paper. Every item that enters the room is logged at the intake counter with a chain of custody form documenting who recovered it, where it was recovered, the date and time of recovery, and the date and time it was sealed into the evidence bag. The bag is tamper-evident, a plastic envelope with a built-in adhesive seal that cannot be opened without leaving a visible mark. Once sealed and logged, the bag receives a barcode and a case number. It is shelved in the appropriate storage zone. Every subsequent access to that bag, for laboratory testing, for prosecutorial review, for transport to court, is supposed to be logged, signed, dated, and witnessed. The room exists on a foundation of trust. The prosecutor trusts that the bag that comes out of storage on the morning of trial is the same bag with the same contents that went in. The defense trusts the same. The jury trusts the same. The entire architecture of every drug prosecution, every weapons case, every robbery, every theft rests on the unspoken assumption that the room is inviolate. The structural vulnerability of a room like that, when you sit with it for a moment, is obvious. The deterrent against theft is the access log. The deterrent against tampering is the tamper evidence seal. Both work, but only against someone whose access to the room is occasional, irregular, suspicious. They were never designed to deter the person whose entire job is to be inside the room every working day. The evidence technician's access is, by design, constant. Her name appears on the log dozens of times a week. Her presence on the camera footage is, by definition, expected. Her hands are on the bags every day, because the bags are her job. The internal affairs alarm that fires when a patrol officer makes an unusual evidence room visit at 3 a.m. does not fire when the technician who lives in that room shows up at her assigned start time. The same access controls that make the room secure from outsiders make it almost transparent to the person who works there. That is not a flaw the system was unaware of. It is a known structural risk that police departments across the country mitigate with audits, peer review, and the assumption that the person with the keys can be trusted. In the spring of 2019, that assumption began to fail. The trigger, by Rawlyn Strizich's own later accounting, was a back injury. In April 2019, she slipped on a patch of ice in the parking lot behind the Billings Police Department building and landed hard on her tailbone. The X-rays at St. Vincent Healthcare showed a compression fracture of the L4 vertebra. Her treating physician prescribed oxycodone for the acute pain, first at 10 milligrams every 6 hours, then at 15, then at 20 when the lower dose stopped working. The prescription tapered over the spring and summer. By August, her physician was unwilling to renew it. She tried physical therapy. She tried over-the-counter anti-inflammatories. She tried a kratom supplement her sister had read about online. None of it touched the pain the way the oxycodone had. None of it, more importantly, touched the steady, low-frequency anxiety that the oxycodone had also been quietly suppressing. The unfinished sense, sitting behind everything else, that her life in Billings was not the life she had pictured for herself at 25, and that the path to anything better had narrowed each year since high school graduation. In late September 2019, the Billings Police Department's narcotics unit completed a multi-defendant trafficking case that resulted in the seizure of approximately 400 oxycodone tablets, sealed in evidence bags and delivered to long-term storage to await trial. Rawlyn Strizich was the technician who logged the seizure into the system. She thought about the bags for 3 days. On the 4th day, sometime during the late afternoon shift on October 3, 2019, Rawlyn Strizich opened the sealed evidence bag containing a portion of the seized oxycodone, removed a small quantity of the tablets, and resealed the bag using a fresh adhesive strip from her own supply. She logged her access to the storage area as a routine inventory check. The replacement seal looked, to anyone who was not looking for it, identical to the original. The weight of the bag was now incrementally lighter, but no one in the department had a reason to weigh it again until trial. The barcode still scanned. The case number still matched. The system, on paper, did not flinch. It was, she told the investigators later, the first time. She had told herself it would be the only time. It was not. By the spring of 2020, Rawlyn Strizich had developed what she would later describe in her court-ordered substance use evaluation as an unmanaged opioid dependence. Her physical pain had not returned to its 2019 baseline. The compression fracture had healed, but the dependence had its own logic now, separate from the original injury. She needed the tablets to function. She needed them to get through her shift. She needed them, increasingly, to get out of bed at all. The evidence room was the only place she had reliable access to them. The pattern, reconstructed from the storage logs and the later forensic examination of the affected bags, was the same one that has surfaced in evidence room theft prosecutions across the country. She would open a bag. She would remove a portion of its contents, sometimes 10 or 15 tablets, sometimes more. She would reseal the bag using a fresh adhesive strip from a roll she kept in her desk for legitimate intake purposes. She would update the bag's external label if the weight had changed enough that a casual inspection might notice. She would log the access as a routine inventory check. For drug evidence other than the oxycodone, for methamphetamine bags she encountered during long-term storage rotations, and on at least 2 later occasions, for fentanyl-laced pills, the pattern adjusted to fit. In some cases, she replaced the removed material with an inert substance of similar visual appearance, the same substitution that has surfaced in evidence locker theft cases from Cottage Grove, Oregon, to Hamilton, New Jersey. In others, she simply allowed the weight discrepancy to ride and trusted that no one would weigh the bag again before trial. The escalation followed the curve that dependence always follows. What had started as a small intervention on a single bag of pills in October 2019 became a recurring withdrawal cycle by mid-2020, a near-daily pattern by 2021, and by 2022 had spread across dozens of separate evidence bags belonging to dozens of separate active criminal cases. She did not tell her husband. The marriage ended in 2021 for reasons that, in the divorce paperwork, were described as irreconcilable. She did not tell her sister. She did not tell her mother. She did not tell Donna Halverson, the training officer, who had signed off on her probationary period 2 months early. She told the bags. She wrote her name on the access log. She walked back to the storage area. She did the thing. She walked out. Every day, the same. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from Rawlyn Strizich. It came from a Yellowstone County prosecutor named Caroline Wendt, who, in the late summer of 2024, was preparing for trial in a 3-defendant methamphetamine distribution case originally filed in 2022. As part of her trial preparation, Wendt had requested that the lead piece of physical evidence, a sealed bag of methamphetamine recovered during the original investigation, be sent to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula for a confirmatory weight and purity analysis. It was the kind of housekeeping request prosecutors make before trial to head off any chain of custody objection from the defense. It was not supposed to surface anything. The crime lab's report came back on August 19, 2024. The weight of the recovered material was 41% lower than the weight recorded at intake. The purity profile of the remaining material did not match the profile of methamphetamine. It matched a benign crystalline substance, most likely table salt or an over-the-counter Epsom salt analog, with traces of the original methamphetamine sufficient to maintain the chemical signature on the surface of the bag, but not in the bulk of its contents. Caroline Wendt called the Billings Police Department's evidence unit supervisor on the afternoon of August 21st. The conversation, by the supervisor's later account to Internal Affairs, was short and procedurally devastating. The bag had been sealed. The seal showed no obvious external damage. The bag had been in long-term storage continuously since intake. The chain of custody, on paper, showed no irregularities. There was no plausible explanation for the discrepancy that did not involve someone inside the evidence unit. The internal review began the same week. It started narrow. A targeted weight audit of the long-term storage section's drug evidence inventory, comparing current bag weights against the intake weights recorded at seizure. The audit team was small: 2 evidence unit supervisors, an internal affairs sergeant, and a representative from the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office. The audit was conducted after hours, in batches, over the course of 3 weeks in September 2024. The pattern surfaced quickly. Bags that had been in long-term storage longer than 18 months were showing weight discrepancies of between 15 and 60%. The discrepancies were not random. They clustered around drug evidence, and within drug evidence, they clustered around opioids first and stimulants second. Bags of non-drug evidence, by contrast, showed weights within normal tolerance. The access logs told the second part of the story. Every affected bag had been accessed, at least once, and in many cases multiple times, by the same civilian evidence technician. Her name appeared on the log dozens of times across the affected inventory. Her access events were spread across nearly 5 years of service. Every entry was procedurally clean. Every entry was logged as a routine inventory or storage rotation check. Her name was Rawlyn Michelle Strizich. By the end of the 3rd week of the audit, the internal review had moved out of the evidence unit and into a separate, secured conference room on a different floor of the headquarters building. The Yellowstone County Attorney's Office had been formally notified. The audit team had begun the work of cataloging exactly how many active and recently closed criminal cases were now in question. Rawlyn Strizich was still showing up for her shifts. She was still walking past the audit team's secured conference room. She was still logging her name on the access roster every morning. She did not yet know. We're about to get into the investigation and what had actually surfaced. Before we do, if you've made it this far, you already know this channel is different. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover cases that mainstream coverage skips, and what comes next in this one is exactly the kind of story that deserves to be told properly. The full reconstruction of Rawlyn Strizich's conduct took the better part of 3 months and required the cooperation of 3 separate institutions. The first was the Billings Police Department's evidence unit itself, which generated the access logs, the intake records, and the original chain of custody forms for every affected bag. The second was the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula, which received batches of the suspect evidence for confirmatory weight and purity testing. The third was the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office, which had to catalog the downstream impact of the tampering across every active and recently closed criminal case the affected evidence touched. The forensic picture that emerged was, in its details, unsparing. The Montana State Crime Lab tested 214 separate evidence bags from the long-term storage section. Of those, 83 returned weight or composition discrepancies sufficient to compromise the evidentiary integrity of the underlying case. The breakdown by substance was instructive. 61 of the 83 were opioid bags, oxycodone, hydrocodone, and a smaller number of fentanyl-laced counterfeit tablets. 18 were methamphetamine bags, several of which contained the kind of substitution pattern that had surfaced in the Cottage Grove, Oregon prosecution 6 years earlier. The remaining 4 were a scatter of other controlled substances. The physical state of the affected bags told the rest of the story. The tamper-evident seals had been replaced, in most cases competently. The replacement adhesive strips were the same brand the evidence unit used for legitimate intake purposes, drawn from a roll Strizich kept in her desk. The replacements were close enough to the originals to pass casual inspection, which was the point. Under close forensic examination, however, the differences became apparent. The adhesive lots did not match the lots used at the original intake date. The seal placement, in many cases, was offset by a few millimeters from the factory-stamped guideline on the bag. The internal access logs, when overlaid with the audit's findings, produced a map of Strizich's conduct that no amount of post hoc explanation could untangle. Every affected bag had been accessed at least once by her in the months and years following its original intake. The accesses had been logged, in every case, as routine inventory checks or storage rotation work, the procedurally invisible category of evidence room activity that the system was structurally designed not to flag. The Yellowstone County Attorney's Office, working from the audit's catalog, began the slow work of identifying every active and recently closed criminal case the compromised evidence belonged to. The number grew week by week. By the time the office finalized its review in the spring of 2025, the figure had reached dozens of separate criminal prosecutions, most of them drug cases, several of them multi-defendant trafficking cases, a handful of them cases that had already moved past trial into the sentencing or appellate phase. For prosecutors, the cascade was the part that mattered most. Every one of those cases now had a chain of custody problem that the defense was entitled to raise. Every one of those cases had a foundation that could be challenged. Every one of those cases would, in the months that followed, be reevaluated for dismissal, retrial, plea renegotiation, or sentence modification. The audit had documented what Rawlyn Strizich did. The county attorney's office was now documenting what it had cost. The confrontation came on the morning of November 4, 2024. Rawlyn Strizich arrived for her shift at 7:45, parked her silver Subaru Outback in the civilian employee lot behind the Billings Police Department headquarters, walked through the side entrance using her city ID badge, and logged her name on the evidence unit's morning roster the same way she had for 9.5 years. She was met in the hallway outside the evidence unit office by two people. One was Sergeant Patrick Doerr from the Billings Police Department's Internal Affairs Unit. The other was Lieutenant Marissa Coyne, the operations commander who had overseen the closed-door audit for the previous 2 months. Both were in plain clothes. Neither was carrying handcuffs. Both knew, by the morning of November 4th, every relevant fact the investigation had surfaced. The conversation took place in a secured conference room on the second floor. There was a table, 4 chairs, a closed laptop, and a manila folder containing the audit findings. Doerr opened the folder. Coyne sat to the side. Strizich sat across from them with her hands folded in her lap. "Rawlyn, I think you know why we asked you in this morning." She did not answer for several seconds. Doerr later described her body language as collapsed, shoulders forward, eyes on the table, both hands still folded, but the knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. "Yes, I know what this is about. I'd like you to be specific. Tell me what you think this is about. The bags, the drug evidence, the bags in long-term storage. I know what this is about. Rawlyn, we need to read you your rights before you say anything else." The interview that followed lasted just under 3 hours. Strizich was advised of her rights. She did not request a lawyer immediately. She admitted, in a sequence of plain, declarative statements that Doerr later described as the most cooperative confession of his career, that she had been removing controlled substances from evidence bags in the long-term storage section of the Billings Police Department evidence unit since October 2019. She admitted that the substances had been primarily opioids, with secondary access to methamphetamine and other controlled substances. She admitted that she had been consuming the removed substances herself. She admitted that she had resealed the bags using adhesive strips from her own desk. She admitted that she had logged every access as a routine inventory check. She did not minimize. She did not deflect. She did not offer a justification. When Doerr asked her, near the end of the interview, why she had not stopped, she said, "I tried. I couldn't." Those were the last words she spoke to her colleagues at the Billings Police Department in any official capacity. At the end of the interview, she was placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave. Her city ID badge was collected, and she was escorted out of the headquarters building through the side entrance she had walked in through 3 hours earlier. She was 34 years old. The criminal case proceeded faster than most of the affected prosecutions it had compromised. The Yellowstone County Attorney's Office filed a charging document on March 17, 2025, in Yellowstone County District Court. The charge was tampering with public records or information, a Montana statute that captures the falsification of an official record, including the chain of custody documentation that accompanies physical evidence in a criminal investigation. The statute was the office's chosen vehicle for the underlying conduct because the falsification of the evidence log, in a case like this, is the procedurally cleanest way to capture the larger pattern of behavior. Rawlyn Strizich's defense attorney was a Billings-based criminal defense lawyer named Hollis Marchetti, who had previously represented several Yellowstone County employees in unrelated administrative matters. Marchetti's strategy, in the early procedural posture of the case, was straightforward. Strizich would not contest the factual basis of the charge. She would cooperate fully with the prosecution. She would enter substance use treatment immediately. She would seek a disposition that recognized the underlying dependence as the engine of the conduct, while still imposing meaningful consequences for the harm it caused. The plea negotiations took the better part of 7 months. The Yellowstone County Attorney's Office consulted with the Billings Police Department, with the Montana State Crime Lab, and with the prosecutors handling the dozens of downstream cases the tampering had touched. There was significant institutional pressure for a custodial sentence. There was equally significant pressure from the defense and from Strizich's substance use evaluator for a disposition that emphasized treatment over incarceration. There was a middle path that, in cases like this, Montana courts have increasingly been willing to take. On November 12, 2025, Rawlyn Michelle Strizich appeared in Yellowstone County District Court before District Court Judge Lawrence Houchins and entered a plea of guilty to the single charge of tampering with public records or information. Under the terms of the plea agreement, the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office will recommend a 6-year deferred imposition of sentence, a disposition under Montana law that holds the sentence in abeyance, contingent on the defendant's successful completion of specific conditions. The conditions, in Strizich's case, include enrollment and successful completion of the Yellowstone County Drug Intervention Program, ongoing substance use treatment, restitution for the costs of the forensic retesting the tampering required, regular reporting to the court, and a permanent prohibition on any future employment in a law enforcement or evidence handling capacity. If she completes the conditions, the sentence will be dismissed, and the conviction will be eligible for sealing. If she does not, if she relapses in a way the court finds material, or if she fails to complete the intervention program, or if she falls behind on restitution without good cause, the deferred sentence becomes a real sentence, and the 6 years move from suspended to imposed. The plea agreement is the document of record. What happens next, procedurally, is still in front of her. At her plea hearing, Judge Houchins addressed Strizich directly before accepting the plea. The transcript records his remarks in full. Ms. Strizich, the court has reviewed the underlying conduct, in this case, at length. The court understands the role that substance dependence played in driving that conduct. The court also recognizes that the harm of the conduct radiates far beyond your personal circumstances. The evidence room of a police department is one of the most procedurally sensitive spaces in the entire criminal justice system. When the integrity of that room fails, the integrity of every prosecution it touches fails with it. Dozens of cases involving defendants, victims, witnesses, and prosecutors who acted in good faith, are now compromised because of what you did. The deferred disposition this court is being asked to accept reflects a judgment that treatment offers the best chance of preventing further harm. It does not reflect a judgment that the harm already caused was minor. I want that on the record. The harm, in concrete terms, has been measured by the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office over the course of 2025. Dozens of criminal cases the affected evidence touched have been formally reevaluated. A number have been dismissed outright on chain of custody grounds. Others have been resolved through renegotiated plea agreements that no longer rest on the tampered evidence. Several appellate filings remain pending. The full ledger of dismissals, retrials, and reduced sentences is still being compiled. The Billings Police Department, for its part, has not been silent on the institutional implications. In a written statement issued the week after the plea hearing, the department acknowledged what the audit had surfaced and what it had cost. The evidence unit's procedures have been restructured. The long-term storage section is now subject to quarterly random weight audits. The civilian evidence technician role no longer carries unilateral access to long-term storage. A second-person verification is now required for any access outside of intake or scheduled inventory work. The department also publicly thanked Caroline Wendt, the Yellowstone County prosecutor, whose 2024 confirmatory weight request had triggered the audit in the first place. Without that single request, the conduct could have continued indefinitely. Rawlyn Michelle Strizich is no longer an employee of the Billings Police Department. Her city ID badge was returned in November 2024 and never reissued. She does not work in any law enforcement or evidence handling capacity, and under the terms of her plea agreement, she never will again. Her name has been added to the appropriate Montana law enforcement employment registries, flagging her permanent ineligibility. She is, as of the date of her plea hearing, enrolled in the Yellowstone County Drug Intervention Program. She is reporting weekly to the court, She is, by all available accounts, doing the work the deferred disposition was designed to require. Whether she completes it remains, as a procedural matter, a question the next 6 years will answer. The cases she compromised, the dozens of separate prosecutions whose chain of custody she broke one bag at a time across 5.5 years inside the evidence room she had been hired to guard, are still being sorted. Some will be retried. Some will be dismissed. Some have already settled into plea agreements that no longer carry the weight they would have carried before her name appeared on the audit report. The full institutional cost is still being measured. What it took to surface the conduct was, in the end, exactly what the structural lesson of evidence room theft predicts. It was not the locks on the door. It was not the cameras on the ceiling. It was not the access logs she generated herself. It was a single prosecutor preparing for a single trial who asked the crime lab to weigh a single bag. That was enough. This case was quiet, but the one on the right side of your screen right now is louder than anything else you'll watch this week. Click it.